So how does WWF Australia think Australia will be affected by climate change?
Australia is actually one of the developed nations in the world that's most at risk of climate change impacts, and that's largely due to us already being a very hot and arid nation. So there's all sorts of impacts then that can happen from climate change, things like floods, things like droughts, increased bushfires. And in Australia, for example, we're a largely coastal nation, so around 80% of our population is actually in the coastal strips around Australia. And so sea level rise and also storm surge, they're things that are of great concern to us. Also, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, in its last report in 2007, it highlighted some of the vulnerable areas in Australia, and one of those, for example, is the Murray-Darling Basin. So that also would have a large impact on our agricultural region. So things like that are of great concern for Australia. Also iconic environmental areas of natural beauty, such as the Great Barrier Reef and Kakadu, they're also very susceptible to impacts from climate change. So for example, the Great Barrier Reef, things like ocean acidification, and Kakadu from rising seawater and saltwater intrusion. Now these iconic areas are not only beautiful and hold amazing varieties of species and animals and amazing ecosystems, they also support large tourism industries. So it's also the businesses that will lose, not just the natural areas in Australia. We would like to see a binding international agreement that reduces and minimises the risk of dangerous climate change. And from our perspective, looking at dangerous climate change, that's really trying to keep global temperature rises below 2 degrees, so below 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels. We really need to try and reduce our emissions by around 40% by 2020, and that 40% is based on 1990 levels of emissions. Now, for developed nations like Australia, that really means that we have to act now. We have to first stabilise our emissions and then start reducing them, and that really needs to be done immediately. But keeping temperature rises below 2 degrees really maximises our chances of avoiding the worst impacts of climate change. Above that threshold, there is no guarantee that we can actually prevent what is known as runaway climate change impacts. So massive impacts, for example, the permafrost in the northern areas around the world melting and releasing methane. Really big impacts like the ice sheets in Greenland commencing to melt or melting faster than they already are. The impacts potentially where we go above 2 degrees are so devastating, not just on natural ecosystems but also on people. For example, triggering massive sea level rises that will displace millions and millions of people. Also losing glaciers from large areas such as the Himalayas, where downstream people rely on the fresh water to have enough drinking water and water for use, fresh water. So it actually really changes the whole dynamics on regional basis of how people live and survive.